Welcome to the Soul Science Nutrition Podcast, where you'll discover that when it comes to your health, you're so much more powerful than you've been led to believe. And now, your host. She's a holistic nutrition and lifestyle coach, chef, author, and yogi, Christine O'Casey.
Hello, and welcome to Soul Science Nutrition. This is Christine O'Casey. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And before I jump into today's episode, I just want to take a moment to express my gratitude for all the folks who have taken the time to leave some lovely ratings and reviews. It really means so much to me, and I just want to let you know I really appreciate you for doing that. And also just to take a moment to remind you that just so you don't miss any upcoming episodes, I do release them every week, every Thursday morning. So please hit that subscribe button just so you don't miss out if you haven't already. And again, thanks so much for all your support. Okay, so on today's show, I have an amazing guest, a good friend and colleague that I met several years ago who shares my passion for holistic health and educating people on the innate intelligence of the body to self-regulate and self-heal. I'll be speaking today with Dr. Chuck Berg. He's the owner of Rivervale Chiropractic. Chuck has been a practicing chiropractor, holistic health counselor, and healthy lifestyle educator for almost 4 decades. Chuck's work is amazing and so impactful. He has helped thousands of patients with his mission to help people step into the best version of themselves through what he calls congruent living. I love this concept. We'll talk today about congruent living. That is the vital importance of walking your talk and taking personal responsibility when it comes to your health and well-being. Chuck is a prolific writer and speaker, and I'm so excited because today you are in for an uplifting conversation that will definitely energize your commitment to creating a healthier, happier you. Okay, so hello, Chuck. Welcome to Soul Science Nutrition. Thanks so much for being here today.
Christine, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
So yeah, we've known each other a few years now, and I know one of the great things that we share is our passion for educating people on the innate intelligence of the body's ability to self-heal and self-regulate. And with this knowing comes the ability to put people back in the feeling of being in the driver's seat of their health. So can you tell us a little bit about that philosophy and how you practice that every day in your work?
I know because I was reared and raised in the philosophy of a chiropractor.
Yes.
So the challenge, Chris, as you know, the both of us know, is that most people do not awaken to this fact, nor were they given this fact. And as a result, so here's our homework. And in fact, here's what our calling is to try to help people understand. And honestly, I don't think it's very difficult at all. So, Chris, if I can say what I like to introduce to my patients or just talking in general, I ask people to give consideration to the most powerful thing in the world, just to say, how does this happen? A tiny sperm cell hooks up with a tiny egg of which neither we can see with our own eyes, microscopic, and yet inherent within there is all the intelligence to put together a living and breathing human being. Your baby, you, me, our parents, everyone, same phenomenon. Please explain that to me. And people look in awe because it is, in fact, with all of science today, too, Chris, as I spend so much time in reading, even the most scientific people, the Russian gentleman, I forget his name, who developed the MRI, he followed the sperm and egg cell. And ultimately, at the end of it, he says, I'm a scientist, but there's only one word that I can come up with to explain this phenomenon, and he called it divinity. So not religious. Now, we're not talking about religion. We're talking about something, as the expression goes, bigger than us, more awesome than us, and also letting go of the need to understand.
Oh, yes, I couldn't agree more. It's there's something unseen. There's something a lot more subtle going on when it comes to, moving and grooving in these bodies. And that's exactly what that expression awesome has sort of taken on for me. When things, it is truly awesome in the true sense when we think about what it takes, for these bodies to work all day long on our behalf. But before we jump in, because this is just so juicy for me, I love this. What put you on the path to becoming a chiropractor? I love the story. I think it's important for our listeners to know, how you came to this path.
So it's so fascinating because we've been having this conversation about callings, how people, what are you called for? And most of us go, oh, come on, The irony is that when I went to chiropractic college, one of the things that the professor said at the beginning is that for most of you, you didn't choose this profession chose you. Whoa. So that happened to me because my whole background, I've always, Chris, loved the human body, meaning I was a collegiate athlete, I was a swimmer. My background was in exercise physiology, and I received a graduate assistantship for a PhD in exercise phys to the University of Maryland. And I was fascinated by it because it was all about how do we create peak performance? What does one body have that another one doesn't? But without getting into the depth of it, my interest was about studying the human body. And I was in my last year as a senior in college. I took a job to make some extra money in a very high-end gym, health facility in Scarsdale. And it was there I met a chiropractor. And I didn't know what the word meant, Chris. I did not know what a chiropractor was. So we got into conversation, and it was this man's joy, enthusiasm, excitement, and just this overall energy that brought me to say, whoa. And he asked me the all-important question, what are you going to do once you get your degree? And I had a pause. And, of course, I didn't have answers. But I cannot explain it that in a matter of 48 hours, I had an application, for the New York Chiropractic College. And a couple of months later, I received an invite, and I gave up my whole graduate assistantship for this because it just felt inherently correct. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
So I was called to this. I honestly believe that. 43 years, I'm deep into it, and I awaken every day with the joy and the blessing of knowing that I can go on and do something in service for someone with my basic and strong belief that the body is a self-healing, self-regulating machine, and our job is not to interfere. So the philosophy that was introduced to me at chiropractic college was so profound, and it touched me deeply. I wasn't in it for money. I didn't know if you earn a lot of money, not a lot of money. That wasn't it. And I came from parents who, I'm very grateful, did not talk to me about how much you can earn. They wanted me to do something that I would enjoy. And, in the rearview mirror, 43 years later, here I am, thoroughly enjoying, each day. And for that, I'm extraordinarily grateful.
Yeah. No, thank you. It truly, it's so touching because it's such a blessing to be able to find your calling and connect to that passion, because I find that, having done that as well and meeting other entrepreneurs who, have been on that beautiful path, is all you want to do is help people wake up to their passion, right? Find alignment in their life and be in service to that. And so you talk a lot about congruent living, which I love.
Yeah.
Walking your talk. And Chuck, I have to say, I've known you for a while now. I know I'm not the first person to observe that, but you really do. You walk your talk. And these days not to be too pessimistic, but in the business of wellness, right? Yeah. In all professions, there's just a little bit of a shadow side to this piece, but where there's no integrity. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by congruent living when you talk about that.
Yeah, so congruent living, as it pretty much defined, walk your talk. What you're asking of other people and what you're recommending to patients is not just a good idea for them, but this is what I have found that has worked well in my life, what's serving me. So to be inauthentic is just not to have integrity, right? To have integrity is to be one with yourself, where we're, for lack of better terms, bullshitting somebody or ultimately bullshitting yourself. And that never feels good. So what I've learned is that what people say, no matter who they are, Christine, it matters little what they say. So, the expression, do it, act it, live it. And it felt wonderful when my very closest friend on my 50th birthday sent me a card. And in it, he says, Chuck, I've known you since you're 17 years old. And what he said to me, quote unquote, Chuck, you are the most congruent human being I've ever met. Well, that's really sweet, but that really touched me because I don't even see it. And he would also tell me, you're so freaking naive, about things. But my point is that you study. And I've always been taught, Christine, we've talked about this, you come around, I don't know if we live more than one lifetime. I'm just going to assume I'm going to live one lifetime. And what I want is I want it to be a beautiful experience. Now, I'm going to say that with the understanding that not every day is beautiful. We have problems in our lives, and I've had many. But what happens is, as we've studied and learned through the books and the wisdom, that what's important is not what happens, but how we interpret our perception. I know you've written about this, and I thank you for that. So getting back to congruency, I came up with this, what I call my Triune of Truth: align the spine, eat from the vine, and calm the mind. It came to me at 5 o'clock in the morning about 5 years ago. And it was like, aha. It was one of those aha moments where it's like, is literally the umbrella of what healthcare is or should be, or at least how I'm going to live it. Okay, so align the spine. I'm a chiropractor, but it goes beyond. It's not just about making correction of the spine. It's about understanding that this amazing body of ours is put together in such an intriguing way. So we become a seeker. And as I study, and I studied even in embryology, the first thing that ever forms was the primitive notochord, which is the spine. Why? Because the brain needs to connect to every other part so that it can send and receive signals. So I have books on yoga, and it's called Awakening the Spine. There's no mention of the word chiropractic because we don't own the spine. We just happen to work on it and other parts.
Yes.
So if people can understand the importance of physical motion to the human body, who's going to deny that? We all agree. Secondly, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition talked to us a lot about the amazing things that happen when we put in good foods to our bodies and the amazing things that happen when we try to nourish our body with either horrific foods or horrific thoughts, and we can get into that in a moment. But the idea that we have a choice in terms of what we put into the body, and remember what my original philosophy course says, the body is an amazing self-healing, self-regulating machine, but our job is not to interfere.
Yes.
But interfere we do. And we do it, Chris, by being sedentary. And that's why the expression today is, sitting is the new smoking.
Yes.
It's the reason why we should have choices in terms of what we choose to put into our foods, into our bodies, the phytonutrients, the important ingredients that on a cellular level, this is all the body needs. Just provide to it what it needs. But do most of us do that? No. I mean, from your clientele, and just look around.
Right.
And ultimately, calm the mind. And in our conversations and in so many of the books that I have read, and in my 43 years with over 10,000 patients, I realized so early in my career as a healthcare provider, most issues stem from how we think. What I call the most important space is the space between your ears.
Absolutely.
Now, all of that sounds wonderful. How do we handle all of this for everybody? Align the spine, eat from the vine, and calm the mind encompasses the physical, the nutritional, the biochemical, and ultimately the thought process. It is my opinion, and I can't give you a number, but I'm going to throw out, like a 90 to 95% of our health-related problems have some derivation in how we think and how we process what we see, feel, and all of the five senses. And it's a distortion. It's not reality. It's our perception that have been molded by previous experiences in our lives. And our job, the job of any healthcare provider, is to try to help enlighten and help people see through the illusions of how they live their lives. Amen.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. It really is, the core philosophy that I practice and that we, explore on this show is this mind, body, soul, connection. And what I love about chiropractic or any modality that understands the importance of the nervous system in the body to create health and sustain it, really gets that, right? I just finished getting my certification in Kundalini Yoga, and it is all about, the importance of creating a healthy nervous system and glandular system, working with our sympathetic nervous system response and all of that from a neurobiochemical perspective.
Yeah. No, I was just going to comment that, here we are, Chris, on what is today, July 1st, in the midst of our, this pandemic thing. And we talk about the body's immune system and how imperative how we think and how we process will have its most important effect. And when I went to school, I had to have a separate book on immunology. Then I had a separate course on psychology. Then we had a separate course. You know what I'm saying? And now when you pick up the books, the tech books, and in functional medicine, all of a sudden everything is about the endocrine biochemical system, so it's all under one, and we have to stop separating. Yeah, we have to stop separating and talking about, and that to me is what holistic, healthcare is all about. Wishing more people could understand it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love the way that you talk about it. It is the space between our ears. It is the thoughts that underlie the behaviors or the struggle with self-care, doing what we know we should do and all of it. Because that's where we want to get into the nitty-gritty. People need tools, I always say, to work with this. And I know, one of the things that you promote and inspire people to do is to something called taking an honest inventory. Yes?
Yeah.
How do you do that? How have you been doing that for the last several decades, you personally?
Yeah. So taking the personal inventory is, to me, the primary, most important thing that we can do. And what I mean by that is, what I've come to realize is that all of us, Chris, yourself, myself, we don't necessarily see ourselves as we are. In my book, what I had written is Your Lifestyle Killing You, the idea is that we spend so much time in this frenetic world, so busy, being busy, that we tend to spend our lives looking outside of us and not inside of us. And of course, what does that mean? Only through self-reflection can we begin to hear the whispers of our own intuition. Most of us don't trust ourselves. And so I'll call up you and say, Chris, what do you think? Here's my predicament. What do you think? Well, what do you mean? What do I think? This is your world. What is your heart telling you? What is your intuition saying to you? And most of us, we are so busy and we're so noisy, even in our head, that we can't hear the subtle, most important intuitive feedback that our body and our wisdom gives to us. So all of this was introduced to me when I began studying, just the world of self-help psychology. I thought it was fascinating.
Yes.
And as a result, so every day, to answer your question, I will awaken every day. And there's a chapter that I wrote, which was important to me. It's like, okay, so if I'm given 24 hours, that's what a day is, 86,400 seconds. How can I maximize that day? Well, the first thing I want to do is take care of the Triune of Truth, which is do something physical, put in something nutritional, and most importantly, work on the space between my ears. So my gig is waking up at 5 a.m. and reading. And the reading is something that's inspiring, not news, not anything else. It's getting me closer in contact with my own truth. Asking questions. How am I showing up? Chuck, what you're telling your patients and your people, are you living your life that way? And it's very important to me to have that integrity, because otherwise, it's just, you feel lousy about yourself. And that's why self-talk, which is really important, because taking the honest introspection is being able to stop at any given moment, Christine, and ask yourself, contemplate my contemplations. What do I think about most of the time? This is the self-talk that each of us, because we're human, that thinking mind continues consistently and persistently. But what neuroscience teaches us, what there is just a series of very narrow, the bandwidth of what we contemplate and think about, which is usually, by the way, our struggles, our challenges, and the things that are preventing us from moving forward and being joyous. They need to be confronted and to even ask the why behind this. It takes time, Chris, and it takes perseverance, and it takes a discipline. But we can spend our entire life knowing more about a handful of friends that we ever know about ourselves. And I think that that's sad. So that's the invitation, is to really take an honest inventory of how I'm living my life. How am I spending it? Where am I showing up? How am I showing up? And these are just generic questions that when we allow ourselves and give ourselves the space, we begin to know ourselves better, and we begin to realize that we are wasting time doing things that never moving us towards the goals and the aspirations and the happiness, not that that's what life is, but having more of it. And that is my calling, is to try to support people in helping them and guiding them. Calling that we have is also something that I believe unfolds over time. So if anyone's listening to this and they say, well, damn, I wish I had my calling is, it finds you more than you finding it. Right. Nothing alone is it. And that's why my evolution as a chiropractor, I came out of school and I was a hands-on backbone to belly chiropractor. Adjust the atlas, adjust the mid-thoracic, adjust the lumbar spine. Okay, ma'am, we'll see you on Wednesday. Come back when it hurts, whatever the protocol was. All of a sudden I realized, after being a seeker, and I believe it's so important that each of us becomes a seeker. We know, what we come to realize is we think we know so much, and half of or 3/4 or 90% of what we think we know isn't even true in its own self. It's an illusion. That's what I've learned.
Yes.
A lot of things we thought were facts were not. So this whole expression, and as an invitation to those who are listening, the one thing I don't want people to do is get very frustrated by saying, well, I don't know exactly what, I'm not really sure. Thank you. That's your journey, and that's all of our journeys. But important to spend time with people like what we're doing right now. Chris, I have choices of being with different people for different reasons, but what lights me up, what the joy that I get, is speaking from interesting people who have spent a lifetime reading, researching, learning, or just experiencing and sharing those things with the goal of taking whoever you're with and bringing them one step up the tone scale. Yeah. And what would happen if we all did that each and every day, regardless of the work that you do? Because I don't believe you have to be a healthcare provider in order for that to happen.
Yes.
So that's the challenge to these listeners. Please, very important.
Yeah. And very, as you reflect on kind of the state of the world right now, in the last several months, I think we've all been on collective pause in so much, in our own ways. There's been just a lot of opportunity, more so than ever, to slow down, to notice, to take care of yourself. Now more than ever, self-care is really not a luxury. It really is a necessity to think about your health and to be much more conscious in your everyday behaviors around, your health and well-being. So it is very interesting. Yeah. It all starts with stepping out of the chaos and the routine, the habitual, right?
The important thing, Christine, is for each of us to ask ourselves the all-important question: is my routine something that is life-affirming, or is it life-depleting? Yes. And part of the honesty game, or part of the self-reflection, is to learn to ask that question and then be honest and say, oh my God, my rituals are having, 4 beers every night, and I'm not condemning anybody who's choosing that, or binge watching shows for 14 hours and sitting in a couch. The choice is yours. But to your point, that this collective pause, and you're right, pause means the ability to slow down or completely stop. And the beautiful metaphor for those listening is to envision we've all passed by a beautiful lake in nature, And if you get there super early in the morning, it is usually completely quiet and there's very little wind. So when the movement in the water is nil, that's when we get those magnificent reflections. So in stillness is reflection. And I think the silver lining for a lot of people in the environment that we're in right now is that it's giving them that opportunity for reflection. So whether they knew personal inventory was right or not, it's manifesting for them. And we always have to ask that, relative to the universe, it is always working for us, not against us. And that's an important embrace for people. Because most of the time, you know what, this effing world, and we listen to our language about how we language things, and then we want to know why we feel the way we feel. So part of self-reflection and part of contemplating your contemplations, which simply means really thinking about what I think about and verbalize, whether it's written or whether it's just ruminating, is a real eye-opener in terms of how people help them see the world. And it's a big invitation, and I hope that people can do that. Carve out the time to spend in self-reflection. And if you really want to go all the way, here's my recommendation, Chris. To have our listeners be so bold as to find someone in their life, a really close friend, where they can actually sit down with them and say, Chris, let me ask you a question, and I want you to be overtly honest with me. Please share with me, how do I show up? And what that simply means is, Christine can come back and say, Chuck, man, you are amazingly congruent. Chuck, not for nothing, but you are always in a state of anger. I mean, that's my vibe that I get from you.
Yeah.
Kidding. Yeah.
No, that's really important to look for reflection everywhere, right? And it can begin certainly with our own moments of contemplation, as you talk about, paying attention to the radio station in our head, paying attention. I think it's really nice that you talk about pay attention to how you speak. Right, the language that comes out, your reactions, and
so
to
powerful.
situations.
So
such a wonderful place to be in observation. If we can kind of be in that observer mode, it also takes the judgment out of it. I find because in my world, specifically when it comes to food-related and weight-related challenges, there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of, self-inflicted, blame. And what I think you and I want to be clear is we're not talking about, they're, blaming ourselves or calling ourselves and making us feel wrong, but really coming from this just very curious, gentle observation. And as you said, just noticing where you need to be more in alignment, just noticing where some adjustments or pivots need to be made based on, my definition of integrity has always been when what you do, what you say, and what you think all line up. Right. And that's a really high bar if you're living in chaos, if you're living, like you said, with the autopilot kind of reactionary, ways of being. So it is really challenging these days. But I think you're right. I think there's a grand invitation more than ever to kind of really, take that inventory in a meaningful way these days. Let me ask you a question. Tell me about a patient, because you've been in service to so many amazing people. Tell me about a patient maybe that touched your heart, changed your practice, or this is why I do what I do.
All right. Well, one gentleman who I worked with early on, probably in the very early 80s, he was an alcoholic and addicted to drugs. And at the time, what can I do as a doctor of chiropractic was to treat him with his spine. But he was vulnerable, and he allowed me into his space of where these problems lie. And I was very much into trying to understand the game of self-esteem, because I realized I had people in my family, too, who had problems with that. When he shared all of this, at the time, I was making my own cassettes. Do you remember the era of cassettes?
Sure.
Yeah, the cassette deck. Yeah, and I would put them in my own little handheld machine, and I would talk about self-esteem. And I started giving this gentleman my tapes, and then I would do my little, I call them my little song and dances. I would give seminars around showing the correlation between stress and the manifestation of illness. Yes. And how our thoughts provoke and change the hormonal things. And of course, we're learning so much about this with neuroscience today. So this is not voodoo. This is like real.
Yes.
And he was so touched by this. And ultimately, he got off all meds. He got off everything. He no longer drank. And he told me that I saved him and saved his life. So that was profound, to know that, oh my God, this little guy from the Bronx, New York, me, had this impact on somebody. And to this day, and I have a binder in my office my mom gave to me before she passed. She unfortunately was stricken pancreatic cancer. And she loved the stories that I would share over the course of my career of the blessings that have taken place. She got me a binder. And today, Chris, it is about 4.5 inches thick with hundreds of letters, cards, comments, anything that was an acknowledgement, because what I have learned is that each and every one of us so desires to be recognized, appreciated, and approved of. And so many patients will come and say, every time I leave your freaking office, I don't know what you do, I feel better about who I am.
Okay.
And so that alone, that is a testimony. So that is my calling. I will not say that is my intention. Like, oh my God, Christine's coming in. Let me make sure I say something incredibly positive and supportive. But what happens is conversation just goes in the direction of helping that patient to feel better, to make recommendations, never telling people what they have to do. But, if you're interested, I can support you in this particular region. I do write. This morning, I wrote a letter that came out. I'm looking. It's called "What Impacts Healing," and part of this is a worthwhile 2-minute conversation, because I sit back, and as I contemplate my contemplations, why did somebody respond so well here? Why did somebody not respond here but went to the acupuncturist and it felt better? Why, if I send somebody to Christine and she was able to modify their eating habits and help them love themselves better and make better choices? So the essence of this is that the same body, but I believe that our beliefs become the paramount factor into people healing as well.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't embrace the idea that working on their spine is helpful and supportive, and I can sense that, I would rather them not come, because belief in not only the work, the product that you do, but also in who you are as a human being makes a huge difference. But what I really knew is that how we feel about ourselves is the most significant thing in the world, the self-esteem. That's an observation that I have. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, because I think it really comes down to that. I guess the term is self-efficacy, right? The belief in our ability to actually get a positive outcome in our lives. And again, we can even talk about the placebo effect or the nocebo effect, which speaks to the power that, again, going back to how we started this conversation, the power of the unseen, the subtle energy that's running, something that we can't, diagram and measure with precision, but nonetheless really is a force to reckon with. So Chuck, I'd like to go back a little bit in your story. And so all of these wonderful life philosophies and teachings, and I'd be interested to have you share the particular personal challenges or hurdles in your life that shaped you and put you on this path to being a seeker, to really embodying and practicing this holistic view of our health and our healing.
My son was born. He was born with a hemiparesis. He had a stroke in utero. And that really impacted me in a huge way, because I realized that, first of all, oh my God, this isn't what I was prepared for. And, it was so painful to have to deal with. But of course, this is what we learn, that the greatest pains of our life become the greatest opportunities. Well, I would never have known that until someone brings that light to me, right? to
Yes.
appreciate that. So if we stop in many of our lives, when you come to realize that the biggest challenges, the biggest complexities that you have were the things that actually broke you open to see and explore in different ways. So I call it wisdom in advance of crisis, Chris. So having been exposed to, much of the readings in the self-care, self-help, self-psychology, whatever you want to call it, I was intrigued by that because I wanted to find why. What makes people unhappy when we're born with this gift of happiness? Watch children. So it is something that's learned behavior. And I'm not there to talk about what happened in people's lives early in their lives, but my point is that I realized that the power of treating the mind in the sense of creating an environment that is empowering and loving and nurturing and supportive, what could happen. So my little boy was born, and we found out within a matter of a few weeks to realize that he had a cortical fist, where the thumb is inside the other fingers, is typical of what you see with stroke patients. Then going to the top child's neurologist in Manhattan, and he says, yes, your kid had a stroke, which wasn't probably the best way of saying it. But I made a commitment at that moment. This was my firstborn child, my only child. I am going to commit the next 20 years of my life. This is the highest priority. And what I really recognized is that two things. I did all of my chiropractic care and physical things to support him. And when a child is that young, we've now learned what's called neuroplasticity, the ability of the body to adapt, much different than when you try to do that to a 60-year-old post-stroke. So it was fascinating. And of course, over time, to watch what he was capable of doing. Now, the other part was that at a year and a half, all of a sudden he suffered a severe seizure. And to the point where we had to bring him to the hospital and they had to give him medication to quiet the nervous system. And I sat there all night thinking, oh my God, when he wakes up, is he going to know who we are? What kind of damage could have been told, because you always hear about this. Oh my God, what's going to be? And over the course of the next 4 years, he had one seizure each year. And the doctors were adamant about putting him on medication. And I could not justify putting him on medication when he had one seizure a year. And I did the math on it, and it came out to be a very small percentage of time. So I finally consented after the fourth one, Chris. And then after the fourth seizure, I said, okay, you guys win. So they gave him something called Tegretol, which is a medication for it. And he, unfortunately, was somebody who responded very poorly, so poorly that he developed aplastic anemia, which is a condition that will kill you because that shuts down the body's bone marrow to produce red blood cell. After that, I was so annoyed with myself, not with the doctors. They were following their procedures and protocols. But we started off the conversation about listening to your intuition. And what I didn't do is I folded, in my expression, I folded to the pressures. And I finally said, okay. So I started searching and I found a chiropractor in Manhattan that does only cranial adjusting procedures. I felt that made most sense because he literally had a spot on his brain from the stroke. So we went there 16, 19 times, whatever, into Manhattan, big trip and the whole bit. And he was 4.5 years old at that time. He's had those 4 major seizures. And after that, he had never had a seizure again. No medication, no anything. So I can't even say to you that was the chiropractor's job. I have no idea other than being in enormous gratitude. And with that being said, so we continued, but the important thing is my heart was speaking to me and to saying, here's a child whose body really doesn't work as well as it should. He had all these seizure activities. They told me he'd probably have a learning disability because it hit him in the Broca area, the language center of the brain. And as he went through school, he went through regular school, but he was always a slower learner and everything else. Had difficult time with learning comprehension. And then at age 13, in the middle of the summer, I get a phone call, something's not right with your kid. And to make a long story short, I ran down to Philadelphia. That's where he was, only to find out he was stricken with juvenile diabetes. So in the point of 13 years, there's been an enormous amount of, it's like, you sit down, you say, okay, dear God, why? You play the why game. And of course, that matters not, and there's no explanation for anything. But to your point,
yes,
I say wisdom in advance of crisis. What I've learned is that when events happen, events they just are. Like you said, it just is, right?
yeah,
It just is. It's the story that we connect to the issues that we have that will either be the wind under our wings or the weight on our tail.
yes,
I said to myself, what if I could take this child at 6 months old and share this wisdom with him? How do you do that, Chuck? How do you do that is I would sit next to his crib every night and put him to sleep. And I'd sat there, just me and him. And I would just talk, or I'd touch his hair and move his hair away from his forehead and let him know how loved he was and how there's no such thing as the word can't. And we would have these kind of very simple and quiet conversations.
so
And
beautiful.
why did I do this? Why did I do this, Chris? Because I read in a book by a psychologist who was working with the Olympic people. And what he basically said is that what we see in our mind's eye is what we manifest. That was kind of like the rap that he was saying. And he said the subconscious mind never goes to sleep. So while he was laying in his crib, doing his little snoring, his dad was sharing quiet, no motivation, no up and down, no jumping, soft, quiet words of love, of support, and nurturing. And, fast forward, Jason's 38 years old and an amazing young man in many respects. He didn't do anything that was like, oh my God, monumental, but he's one of the happiest and most joyful people that I know. And that alone,
Wow.
to me, he is, people will say, oh, but you're amazing. No, he's amazing. I talk it, he lives it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so beautiful. You can pull from that as direct evidence is that when we have those hurdles and challenges and pain in our, painful moments in our life, it's like a turning point. How do we want to navigate? We have a choice.
Yeah.
There's always a choice, as to how to respond.
You're
and like you
right,
said,
but most people don't even know that choice exists because of what our surroundings have been. If we come from doom and gloom, and that's always what we hear, and we hear the language of our parents, the language of our caregivers, the language of society, it becomes, you have to really be strong in your belief and willingness. And one last thing I think I should comment if people are listening to this, Chris, is that with Jason, the other thing is turn your obstacle into your opportunity. So with his diabetes, I thought that it would be an amazing thing because he was managing it very well. I put a gym in the house because I knew that was something that's going to be helpful. And he developed this amazing body, which is okay. That's just the physical part. But we leveraged it. And I say we because it was some of my ideas. My idea was how does this kid feel awesome about himself? How?
Yeah.
Teach it.
Yeah.
So at 15, he became a personal trainer. And he failed the academic part of it twice, taking the tests, but he had persistence. Persistence and willingness and determination alone are omnipotent. And if he can understand that, so I failed. Screw it. Let me do it again. Bring it on. And he did, and he passed and everything else. So he started his home-based gym, and within a matter of a month, he had 10 juvenile diabetic clients that he's now training. Parents would come to me and say, Chuck, the best thing that's ever happened to my child is having your child in their life.
Oh my God.
How does that feel as a parent, right? Do we want to hear things like that?
Such a gift.
Unbelievable. A gift.
Such a gift. Yeah,
a
gift.
And so we just kept taking these opportunities to do these things. And then I contacted Muscle and Fitness magazine, and I said, hey, I think you guys would have a really interesting story, listening to what my son has been doing and helping other people. And in 1991, January of 1991, Muscle and Fitness did a 3-page article on Jason taking this young boy taking diabetes, his juvenile diabetes, turning it obstacle into an opportunity. Now he started having people from all over the world, literally with emails, calling him, contacting him. He was like a stud. He was the one that everybody wanted. So here it is, despite having the issues that he's having, I would hope he's feeling pretty good about himself, and I would say he was and is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean everything is perfect. And I'm sure that he, has his moments of
Sure.
frustration and wishing he could do more things, and not having a little bit of an issue with his right hand and unable to do work at times where he needs a second person. But it's acceptance of what is, and our willingness to work with what we have and recognize that, my God, Jason, I told him, you have a disease that is manageable. Other people have a disease that they can't do anything about, and they just watch themselves deteriorate. But guess what? The onus is on you. So I turned over all responsibility of his diabetes to him.
Yeah.
I did not learn all about what had to be done. It was him, and he did it, and I took away that helicopter parent thing,
Oh, yeah,
and just
sure.
turned it over.
Yeah.
Your responsibility. This whole game is about personal responsibility. Yeah.
And I actually share that, with our listeners early. And as I introduced you is, this notion, or this very important philosophy of congruent living, but also with that comes personal responsibility, right? Personal responsibility. No one else cares more about your body than you. I've always said that, right? So there, if you sign up for that radio station and sign up for all that goes with that lens to move through your life, how different does that be when it comes, to treating your body, right? Seeking out the resources that are actually going to help you. But you have to be engaged. And that's another really great thing. I know you and I share this a lot, trying to work with this kind of tendency for us to hand our bodies over like a car, if you will, and fix me, because so much of it, as we've talked about now, is within our range. It starts in our belief system. It starts in our attitude towards what's possible in our life, a consciousness that comes to how the body really does work, that its normal state of function is health. And it, I always say that the body wants to be healthy, and right there, I know with, the modalities that you work with, if the body wants to be healthy, then what we're always looking to do is to find out where the stuckness, and how do we kind of just, in parlance, you use the word adjustment, but it really is very inappropriate word. Where do we make the adjustment? Right?
You're right. Yeah.
All related, as you said. And that's why I think chiropractic is such a beautiful, comprehensive modality, particularly in the way that you have become so versed in it, because it understands that it is more than just the body, but it's also more than just our thoughts. And in fact, you really can't separate these things anymore, right? As you started to say.
And then that's why the umbrella, when you look at it, if people can just take what we're having conversation over and just say, hey, how am I doing with regards to my physical motion? And, figure out, we don't have to tell you. And some people are so freaked out but I'm not sure what exercise. Move, pretend, dance in the rain, move your body.
Yes. Agreed.
A worthwhile thing. I talk a lot, and you've attended even some of my seminars where we talk about the blue zones around the world where people live on average to 100, 105, and they live quite well. I mean, inordinately healthy. Yes. And the irony is that these are places where they don't have fancy doctors. They don't have hospitals. So, I always say, boy from the Bronx says, hey, man, what's up with that? What's up with that? So the reality is maybe too much interference by us in terms of the traditional Western medicine and things of this nature. Just give people the opportunity. So when National Geographic sends their scientists, they study them. What do they come back with? In the very simple steps, these people get up at 7 a.m, they go to bed at 7 p.m. For 12 hours, they're in motion. Whether they're 95, the 95-year-olds are doing what the 20-year-olds, and this is their routine. Secondly, they eat only things that grow. Well, all of a sudden, now we're getting what, Chris is trying to explain to people: eat foods that grow, not things that aren't altered, modified, putrefied, whatever.
Right.
And that is what gives your cells that's all they need. Thirdly, these people, and this I think is a very valuable point too, as I soon to turn 68 years of age, as we grow older, in those cultures, you are revered as a senior. People will come to you at all ages and say, Chuck, please share with me, teach me, guide me. In our country, post 60, man, you're putting it up on a shelf like a loaf of bread that's been into the supermarket too long.
Yeah,
and you're put away. And they tell us that loneliness and being of value is really, really important. So when you think about it, those are three basic things that we're talking about within our umbrella. So without making this complicated, the irony, the duality is that it's so freaking easy, but it requires a discipline, and it requires breaking the habit of being myself, like a Joe Dispenza's book, because our neurology, we don't realize that through repetition of not only movement, but thought, we've laid down brain tattoos. And these brain tattoos are so powerful that unless we can actually confront them and see past the illusion of what we have chosen to believe, we are going to stay stuck in our stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I know you're a big reader, like I am, and you've been at this a while, learning from a lot of wonderful thought leaders and in personal growth, if you will. What are your favorite resources that you share with your patients?
There are so many, like you said, and I think what I really have to do is get a sense of my patient.
Sure.
Carolyn Miss, Defying Gravity, I found to be a very helpful book, because that was the other thing about trying to get us away from understanding things and reasoning, because so much of what goes in our lives is beyond the five senses.
Awesome.
And in a world where, we need to know, that's why people are always so freaked out. That's why they're in fear. They want to have answers. And when I've investigated my own awareness, what I've come is that the more I learn, as the old expression goes, the more I realize what I don't know. So I turn over, like, to the body. When I do the best I can, I look at an x-ray. Guess what? Gives us some information. If there's nothing broken, whatever, it's a bunch of bones, but there's a whole lot more that's going on. And finally, which goes back to this whole arena of awareness, is a field of energy. And that's what some people can call the divine, having nothing to do with religion, but going beyond understanding. Nor when I wake up, I've been around on this planet for 68 years. How come I haven't had any, issues of health-related problems, whatever it may be somebody else does? What's happening with the countless billions of cells that are acting, reacting, and interacting in a fantastic concert of highly intelligent activity, of which no doctor or group of doctors knows more than a fragment of the complex? The mystery of life is still a mystery. Well, that's a quote that I had taken 40 years ago from Boyd's Pathology, from a medical book that they give in medical school. And guess what? Even then, this man was the first, real medical doctor who I ever heard use that language. We have no freaking idea. We have some idea, but the body's too complicated to really understand. So every day that you and I wake up, you have no idea what your gallbladder is doing. You have no idea what your intestines are doing. You don't know how you're excreting. You don't know how you're absorbing. I mean, serious, right?
Yeah.
So this is what I mean about an energy. And this is where people say, well, that's you're like voodoo. No, this is real life. It goes so beyond. Yeah. Very important for people to embrace that.
Right. So I would, And that's why I think, people ask me, how did I get into, working with energy and pursuing, that element of transformation and healing. And the longer you understand, there's something going on in this mind-body interconnection that's going on. And you want to find ways to understand it deeper, leverage and accelerate that interaction. You get into energy. Albert Einstein, everything is energy. And so our thoughts are energy, the food we eat is energy, the emotions are certainly energetic, and I think what you and I are very passionate about is this paradox, right? It's simple, as we said, right? It's simple, but it's also beautifully complex. But at the end of the day, I know you love to say it's not enough to know, right? Because you and I, we can say, read this and study that and understand that.
Yeah.
We actually have to do. We actually have to take action, right? So
Yeah.
what do you find yourself saying to a patient who comes in and says, I just feel really stuck. I feel like I've blown it. My body's really not doing well. I just don't know where to start. What do you find yourself saying just to light that spark and so it doesn't feel so daunting? Because it can feel really overwhelming sometimes.
I'm sure it can. And I like to always come from the space of, I explain to people what's my why. The expression without a why, there's no comply,
yes.
right? So
yes.
if we don't in order to get compliance, we have to understand why. To take your whole life is too big, but let's just work the 24 hours because that's something that we can control. Mm-hmm. So master your day and master your life. So I would invite people to really try to break down what their morning looks like, a morning routine, a shake in the morning that has all of the nutrients. That's one step that you can do. Why? Because it is so nutrient dense that if I didn't need anything else the rest of the day, I'm not suggesting that, but they're getting pretty much every phytonutrient on the planet as a result of what we've chose to put in there. Yeah. I talk about getting up that extra hour earlier. Commit to it. It's not, get out of the illusion of I'm going to be exhausted. They're going to be exhausted by not freaking moving. That's why. Getting back to even reading some concepts about Buddhism for me has been very informational and has really opened my eyes to a different way of looking at, as we started with, the isness of the world. Rather than judging it, complaining it, speaking about it, putting judgment on other people, I just be. I try to be like, when I look out in nature and I see the plants, and none of these things are struggling. They're just existing. The winds blow, they move left, they move right. They just accept the isness without being stepped on. They will do what they need to do. And I love to tell people that my goal is no longer about things and stuff, but I want to be that spiritual warrior. I want to be a person who can live with all that's happening in my life and still be. My undercurrent of default emotion is joyfulness. And present that and give that away to people. And with that, again, the life tends to reward us with a response very similar to what we are giving is what we get in receiving. And I have found that to be extremely supportive in my lifetime.
That's wonderful. And I was just going to ask you, if there was a quote that you would like to close with, and maybe you've already sprinkled in so many, but is there anything maybe that comes to mind as you end on that note?
It's your future. Be there healthy.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you so much, Chuck. This has been lovely. And of course, if folks want to find out more about, you and where you work and how to access more of your wonderful wisdom, where should they go?
Yeah, I have a website, rivervalechiropractic.com. If anyone is interested, on Amazon, I wrote a book called Is Your Lifestyle Killing You? How to Chase Dreams Without Sacrificing Your Health and Your Sanity. This is my joy, trying to support, nurture others. And I just want to say thank you to you, Christine, for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate you greatly.
Oh, it's been wonderful. I appreciate you as well. All right. Thank you so much, Chuck. Take care.
You do the same, Chris. Bye-bye now.